Today, we are diving into an absolutely timeless drama. It's a story all about power, greed, and fate, and it stars one of ancient Israel's most notorious rulers, King Ahab. It's one of those questions that just echoes through history, right? And the story of King Ahab of Israel, well, it gives us one of the most vivid and frankly chilling answers you'll ever find. Okay, let's get right into it. We start with King Ahab. Now, he's a powerful guy, but he's also spiritually corrupt. He's riding high, fresh off this major military victory, but it's right here in his moment of triumph that he makes a huge, faithful mistake. So get this. A prophet had already warned him that this enemy, Ben-Hadad, was a man God had basically marked for destruction. But Ahab, maybe he's thinking strategically, seeing a political upside, he lets him go. The prophet's response, it's brutal. He says, because you spared him, your life is now the payment for his. And just like that, this dark shadow is cast over the king's entire reign.
And this is where the story takes such a fascinating turn. We go from this grand stage of international war to a small, kind of insignificant plot of land. But it's this little piece of ground that's going to expose the king's deepest, darkest character flaws.
So the vineyard is right next to the palace, and Ahab decides he wants it for a vegetable garden. Simple enough. But Naboth says no, pointing to religious law. You just don't sell your family's inherited land. And how does Ahab, this all-powerful king, react? He acts like a spoiled kid, literally goes to bed sulking and refuses to eat. And that is when his ruthless wife, Queen Jezebel, steps onto the scene. She's a worshiper of the storm god Baal, and in her mind, a king's power is absolute. She has zero patience for this kind of weakness from her husband.
Jezebel's plan is just terrifyingly brilliant in its wickedness. I mean, she doesn't just commit a murder, she orchestrates a total perversion of the justice system. She uses the king's authority to forge letters, she manipulates religion by calling for a public fast, and then she twists the legal system itself by hiring 2 false witnesses, because that's the number the law required, to make sure the conviction sticks. It's just a horrifying, masterful abuse of power. But you can't just murder an innocent man for his garden and expect no one to notice. Just as Ahab arrives to claim his new prize, who should he run into but his old nemesis, the prophet Elijah? And this sets the stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations in the entire Bible. Wow, this is the point of no return. Elijah doesn't just condemn Ahab in general terms. He delivers a prophecy that is chillingly specific. The exact same fate that Naboth met, that's what's coming for the king. And it doesn't stop there. Elijah says Ahab's entire family line will be wiped out and that dogs will eat Queen Jezebel herself. But then, we get a twist you probably didn't see coming. Faced with this absolutely horrific destiny, Ahab, the same king who was just sulking over a vineyard, he actually repents. He tears his clothes, he fasts, he humbles himself before God. And God sees it. So the sentence isn't canceled, but it is postponed. The disaster won't happen in Ahab's lifetime, but in his son's. It's this incredible brief moment of grace. Okay, let's fast forward 3 years. That brief moment of humility? Yeah, it seems to be a very distant memory. Ahab's made an alliance with King Jehoshaphat of Judah, and he's feeling ambitious again. He's planning to go to war to reclaim a city called Ramoth-Gilead. But first things first, you gotta consult the prophets. So Ahab gathers his prophets. And we're not talking about a small focus group here. He gathers 400 of them, and he asks them all one simple question. And their answer is just this roaring, unanimous chorus of, yes, go for it, you're gonna triumph. But his ally, King Jehoshaphat, he's a little suspicious. He asks, isn't there anyone else we can ask? Well, turns out there is one guy, Micaiah. But Ahab hates him. Why? Because he never prophesies anything good. So when they finally drag Micaiah in, his message is the complete opposite. He sees a vision of Israel scattered and defeated like a flock of sheep without a shepherd. And then Micaiah pulls back the curtain on what's happening in the spiritual realm. He describes this incredible scene in heaven's court where God actually allows a lying spirit to enter Ahab's prophets, all to entice him, to lure him to his fated end at Ramoth-Gilead. So what does Ahab do with this terrifying divine warning? He has Micaiah slapped in the face and thrown into prison, telling him he'll be fed on bread and water until the king returns victorious. And that brings us to the final act, with Micaiah's grim prophecy just hanging in the air.
Ahab charges into his very last battle, and he's armed with a pretty desperate plan to try and cheat fate itself.
The plan is actually pretty simple. He'll go into battle disguised as just a common soldier. Meanwhile, his ally, King Jehoshaphat, will wear the royal robes, basically acting as a decoy. Pretty clever, since the enemy has been given one specific command: target only the king of Israel.
It really seems like a smart move, doesn't it? If nobody knows who he is, how can they possibly target him? He is literally banking on being anonymous to survive the very battle that Micaiah promised would be his last. Can he actually pull it off?
But you just can't outsmart destiny. As the battle rages on, an enemy soldier draws his bow and fires an arrow completely at random, no specific target in mind, and that one anonymous arrow flies across the battlefield and strikes King Ahab in a tiny gap in his armor. He's mortally wounded and he bleeds out in his chariot as his army loses the battle. And here, the whole story comes full circle. When his bloody chariot is being washed by a pool back in Samaria, the dogs come and lick up his blood. In the very city where Naboth was murdered, the prophecy is fulfilled. Not by some epic duel or a targeted assassination, but by a completely random act of war that turned out to be the perfect instrument of fate. So in the end, Ahab's story leaves us with this really powerful question. That one brief moment of genuine humility, it was enough to actually delay divine judgment, showing there was a path to mercy. But his return to pride, his flat-out refusal to hear an inconvenient truth from the one dissenting voice in a room of 400, that sealed his doom. It makes you wonder, maybe in the face of our biggest flaws, humility isn't just a virtue. Maybe it's a strategy for survival.